Riyadh season comes to LA. Could this be the greatest card on American soil in a long time?
I've got my idea for one of the greatest dream cards that you could ever have. But honestly, that's just me being greedy because we're getting some great matchups throughout.
Listen, it's clearly the greatest card ever, and I'm proud to say I was there to help announce it.
Or was Shawn Porter on the greatest card of all time? We'll break them down on Deep Waters, coming up now. Welcome into Deep Waters, where we take a deep dive on all things boxing. Now, we're talking about August 3rd. We're wondering what His Excellency Turki Alalshikh would be able to do in America with deep pockets. We're finding out one of the greatest cards of all time. Jimmy Smith alongside Paulie Malignaggi, Chris Algieri, Showtime Shawn Porter joining us as well. Gentlemen, let me give you the rundown. We have right now Terrence Crawford, Israel Madrimov for the junior middleweight title. Then we have Andy Ruiz, Jarrell Miller, Pitbull Cruz, Jose Valenzuela. Also, Tszyu versus Vergil Ortiz. It is stacked, gentlemen, from top to bottom. We all know one of the criticisms other combat sports fans, hey, why aren't you paying for the boxing pay-per-views? They go, well, you get basically one card. We get one fight. You don't get a whole card. It's not stacked from top to bottom. This is the exact opposite of that. And, the question has to be asked, is this the greatest card of all time? Do you think it's one of the best you've ever seen, Paulie?
On paper, we've seen some pretty good cards on paper that then they sometimes don't pan out. I can remember some really good cards back in the day that were fun top to bottom, even some cards that I worked on back when I was the Showtime top to bottom, especially early in my Showtime days. We used to have some good quadruple headers. But, dude, this could have a couple of these fights could be main events. I mean, for example, for me, Vergil Ortiz, Tszyu is a main event fight. I mean, that's a dynamite blockbuster pick'em fight. It's wild that Tszyu is coming back off that huge cut that he just came off of, and if he's just gonna jump in with Vergil Ortiz, and Vergil Ortiz himself, who has kind of had some medical issues and has been slow running, getting up the ladder in the last couple of years, but also has greatness expected of him. Just gonna jump in with Tszyu. That's a main event fight right there. Madrimov, a world champion, Crawford a chance to get a world title in his fourth weight class. I mean, and there's other fights. I mean, the Ruiz and Miller. Okay, maybe it's not a main event fight, but it's a fun fight. I mean, styles make fights, and that's a fun fight. I mean, and I'll let you guys cover the rest of them, man, because those are some of the good ones so far, and then they get my mouth watering.
But that's the question, Chris. Is the main event still the most compelling fight? Terrence Crawford, usually that would be far and away the biggest fight on the card. Is that still the case with this card?
So, with cards like this, and you're talking about, the best ever, a lot of it is going to be figured out in hindsight, right? You're going to look back, how do these fights pan out? How do the fighters, pan out? How do their futures look? I mean, with the Terrence Crawford-Madrimov fight, that's a historic fight. You've got Terrence Crawford fighting in his fourth weight class, fighting for unification and just another weight class. Like, he can legitimately, I can see him being legitimately a unified champion, an undisputed champion in a third weight class, which is wild. Never been done. It's already never been done that he's done it twice in the men's division. Clarissa Shields did it in the female division. But Terrence has already done it twice, undisputed. He now has a chance to legitimately vie for an undisputed championship at 154 in his third weight class in a row and his fourth weight class overall in terms of being a world champion. Also, we didn't even mention Andy Cruz, man. Andy Cruz is awesome. And we might look back at a couple years from now and be like, wow, remember when Andy Cruz fought on that card too? Because he is that good.
And he's fighting Moran, right?
And he's fighting Antonio Moran, who's been on our air. And Antonio Moran is very, very tough. He's a guy, his highlights kind of getting knocked out by Devin Haney, but a beautiful overhand right. But still, I mean, he's a very, very tough out. And for fighting a guy like Andy Cruz, who's so early in his career,
and
it's a big step.
That's the intrigue right there. Moran has been a guy who's been pretty good, but he seems to his ceiling seems to be about the ProBox TV level.
Well, he beats everybody on our air all the time.
When he steps up to championship level, he seems to come up short each time, anytime he's gone of the championship level. So, for a guy like Cruz, who is obviously a stellar amateur, stellar Olympian, all that good stuff, but he doesn't have a lot of pro experience. So for him to go up against this guy Moran, who's only come up short against world-class opposition, that's pretty interesting too, man. Dude, you got some good ones on this card.
And I want to touch on Andy Ruiz. Andy Ruiz, he's the absent heavyweight, the absent talented heavyweight, the guy who knocked out Anthony Joshua in one of the biggest upsets in history. I mean, his return People are going to really care about that. You got a Mexican heavyweight. That's a big deal. So having him come back, fighting Jerome Miller, who actually has been active for once. He fought recently against, came up short against Dubois, but Dubois is a world-class guy as well. This is a really good litmus test for Andy Ruiz and what he can do in the future. And once again, I'm just going to reiterate, we might look back on this card in a couple years and be like, yeah, that really was the best card ever.
Showtime, your thoughts on it? Is the main event still the big attraction? Are there other fights on the card that you think are more compelling?
Wow, I think, for the first time, we have an entire card. I always look at the undercard fights as getting the ring hot for the main event. The main event's going to be hot because you got Terrence Crawford, who's virtually unstoppable, the most versatile boxer in the world at this point in time, going up against an elite fighter who does not stop, does not want to stop for anyone. Asked him the other day, hey, what's the #1 thing you got to do? He said, I got to be me. Great answer, because that's exactly what you have to do. Terrence Crawford is a master at getting fighters outside of what they do well and forcing them to do the things that they don't do well so that he can compete, so that he can defeat them. And so that fight's going to be fire hot. You got Pitbull and Ryo on the card. I mean, we know what Pitbull is going to do. And we've seen Ryo in the past. He's had electrifying power in the past. I think if anything, the fight on the card that we may not be able to really come up with the exact how this one's gonna go is the heavyweight fight. You got Jarrell Miller, who, even though like Chris just said, he's been active, but he didn't really show up in that fight against Daniel Dubois. And then of course, we got Andy Ruiz, who hasn't been in the ring for like 2 years. So I think if anything, that's the only fight we don't know how that one's going to go. However, it's the heavyweight division. They always punch hard, and somebody's going to go down on the floor, on the canvas in that one. So I think all in all said, man, every fight is going to get that ring hot for the main event. Still think the main event's the best fight on the card because stylistically it's beautiful. And it's Terrence Crawford. You got to see this kid while he's still around. I give him maybe another year tops, and then he's out of the game. So anytime he's in the ring, you got to be watching him.
Well, it's not just great cards. Is it a great card compared to other cards? We'll make those comparisons when we come back, including a card featuring our own Showtime, Shawn Porter. England versus Eastern Europe, May 8th, former world champion coming into the ProBox TV ring. It's going to be great. As always, Jimmy Smith alongside Paulie Malignaggi, Chris Algieri, Showtime Shawn Porter joining us, which is a real coincidence. Why? We have a great card coming up August 3rd. We're debating how good it really is as compared to all the other great cards we've had in boxing history. Let's take it back a little bit. It was at the Sports Arena in LA. That's right. December 15th, 2012, Amir Khan versus Carlos Molina, Leo Santa Cruz versus Alberto Guevara. We got our own Showtime Shawn Porter versus Julio Diaz, Deontay Wilder versus Kelvin Price, also on the card. Young guy, maybe you heard of him, Errol Spence Jr.? Maybe you've heard of that guy? Come on. But Showtime, you didn't get the win on that one, man. Got a draw. What is with that, man? Disappointing when I was looking over it.
That's not what we're talking about right now, all right? We're talking about how stacked the card was, all right? Listen, in retrospect, we, at that point in time, obviously we knew the trajectory and where everybody should have been going. But at that point in time, that was not the biggest card in America. I mean, in retrospect, now you can say, wow, all of these big names were on that card back in the day. But I mean, as you can see, I got a draw in that fight, probably second worst performance I've ever had in my boxing career in its entirety. You know what I mean? So, I mean, there was a lot of big names on that card. I even saw Hugo Centron on that card. I mean,
Centeno, yeah.
A lot of big names on that card, but nothing beats this card happening August 8th.
I called that card.
But here's the question, gentlemen. We talk about, it's great retroactively, right? You see all the names, and they have their performance, and you look back and go, man, that was a great card. You don't get a refund on the pay-per-view. What I mean is big names draw in the revenue. They can fight how they fight. You don't get a refund. Could this change the economics of the sport where you got to spend money on an entire card from top to bottom to get people to buy pay-per-view? Paulie, what do you think?
Well, I was saying, I think, first off, I remember I called that card. I was on the commentating team. That wasn't out of pay-per-view. So for starters, you make a great point, Jimmy, about not being able to get a refund. You got to make sure you're delivering here. And Sean also makes a great point. At the time, we didn't know how big of a star everybody was going to be. Now, looking back, you're like, oh, man, there's a lot of big names on that card. All those guys.
Hindsight.
Yeah, hindsight. You know, so it looks like a huge card now. But at the moment, it was a good card. It was a solid card. I remember the Santa Cruz fight was pretty one-sided. I didn't, you know, it wasn't like it wasn't anything spectacular. I remember Sean's fight was pretty exciting, even though Sean's not happy with the performance. It was pretty exciting. It was a good back-and-forth fight. It was a solid card overall, but it wasn't something you looked at like, oh my goodness. See, this card here, it's on pay-per-view for a reason. Right. You're getting a lot of dynamite big names and basically bona fide big names. Like, people already know those are big names in the sport, and those are championship names in the sport. So certainly this at least gives you a reason to say, okay, this is pay-per-view, guys. I mean, this is champion versus champion versus champion versus champion versus champion. At the time back then, there were some champions on the card, but there were a lot of future champions. But you don't know if they're going to be future champions at that moment. We look back in hindsight and we say, okay, you know, that turned out to be some card looking back in hindsight. But I do look back at some of the cards in the 90s. I do look back at some of the cards in the 90s. I'm struggling to remember. I'm just trying to think, but I can remember a card where Julian Jackson versus Gerald McClellan was on the undercard. It was on the pay-per-view part of the pay-per-view. But I think it might have been Morrison versus Foreman. But I got it
right here. It was,
you do got it.
Chavez Sr. versus Frankie Randall, Simon Brown versus Terry Norris, Gerald McClellan, Julian Jackson, two of the hardest hitting middleweight, by the way, of all time.
That mean you're talking about
Azuma Nelson and Jesse James Leija.
Exactly. So we're bringing it to back to basically 90s boxing. You know
94.
I mean?
I was in high school. I'll admit that. I'll admit that. I was in high school at that time. Yeah, that was an amazing card. Yeah.
But what I'm saying is this was the norm at one time. Then boxing kind of got away from it because why? The main event fighters kind of got too greedy and said, we got to throw all the money into the main event. And so there's less money to spend on the undercard. Or if you got less money to spend on the undercard, or even the TV undercard, becomes pretty dull, you know? So at that time, the money was spread around pretty well. That's where Turki Alalshikh comes in. He's got enough money to spread around pretty well and fill up an entire card.
Now, Chris, that's my next question, where when you look at a card like this, once we've been discussing the economics and perhaps the overinflation of certain fighters and we're looking for bigger and bigger purses, could it work in a card way where he's spending all this money on a card, you can't go back? Now we expect every card to be stacked top to bottom. Promoters got to pay a lot more money. Has he set a precedent that'll be hard for other promoters to follow?
What he's really doing is changing the market. And so you said, is this a new era? It's actually not. And to Paulie's point, it's a return to the 90s era, to return to big-time boxing with full-fledged cards that are not only top-heavy but are good throughout. And now, speaking about the market, I actually think we've been in transition for a little while. Last year, PBC and Showtime did some really good top-to-bottom cards. Really, really good. If you really look at them, there were some really nice cards that were done last year, undercards that were actually worth watching. People were tuning in. And I think a part of that has to do with dealing with other fight sports that have very, very deep cards. And, you know, when you're looking at UFC, guys tune in for the undercards. They're very unlike boxing, where a lot of people don't even show up to the arena. So this is different. You know, now you've got a card that you want to show up when the doors open. You want to watch every fight. I want to sit down outside in front of my big screen TV and watch every fight on the card. And not just because I'm an analyst, not just because I'm media and I have to cover it, because I'm a fan. I'm a fan first, and they're good fights. I want to see each one of these fights and how they turn out, because the fighters that are involved in these fights,
there's an intrigue in all of
there's intrigue now.
There's a storyline in every single fight.
And I keep speaking about hindsight, looking back, and like you said, retrospectively, oh, that's a really good card. This is a really good card for now. It might be a really great card in the future if these guys turn out to be, you know, if Andy Ruiz goes on a run and Andy Cruz becomes what he should become, and Terrence Crawford goes down as the best fighter who's ever lived, which is very possible if he keeps winning the way he's winning and taking all these belts under his record. So yeah, I think right now this is an excellent card, but it has the potential to legitimately be the best fight card ever.
But what is the best we could ever possibly make? That's the question we're going to answer when we come back. Dream cards. That's right, on Deep Waters when we come back. Welcome back to Deep Waters. We pride ourselves here at ProBox TV on evenly matched fights, right? There's no A side, there's no B side, evenly matched fights. Now, we're gonna play a little game here. Don't wanna make it creepy and kind of Saw-esque, but let's play a game. You have unlimited money. We're discussing the August 3rd card in LA, supposed to be one of the greatest of all time. You guys have unlimited money. Who do you wanna see in the ring? Let's say 4 or 5 fights. Paul, hit me.
I'm first.
I
want to go first.
Sean,
I want to go first.
Sean, go ahead.
Yeah,
He
go ahead,
just
Sean.
jumped in. Go ahead, Showtime. All yours, man.
All yours, buddy.
These guys got all the names. I'm like,
I know my idea. Nobody's gonna have it because it's a bit off.
I still want to see Deontay Wilder and Anthony Joshua.
Okay.
That's my main event fight. Co-main. David Benavidez, Canelo Alvarez. Right underneath them, I would like to see Terrence Crawford and Sebastian Fundora get it on. I think that's a really good boxing match. And I gotta put on the card Tank Davis and Shakur Stevenson. One of the best stylistic fights in the world. I don't care what anybody says, man. That's a
Sean, so you would open it with Shakur versus Gervonta Davis?
Yeah, man.
I mean, that would be your opener.
That's my opener.
You're out of your mind. You know why?
Why?
Because the other three are mismatches. Crawford smashes Fundora. Joshua smashes Wilder because Wilder's shot. And Benavidez smashes Canelo. That's not a competitive fight either. You're out of your mind. Shakur versus Gervonta has to be the main event because that's the only competitive fight on that card.
All right, put it up or shut it up. What is your card, Paulie? What is
all
your
big
card?
names, I get it, but now those are all mismatches.
I shouldn't have went first.
I'll tell you what I would do. I'm not gonna pick names, but I would do sort of a Super Bowl of boxing where I would take the best fighters in a weight class. I would do each pay-per-view would be pick its own weight class. So they say in the super middleweight division, I would do a 8 versus 1, 7 versus 2, 6 versus 3, 5 versus 4. Right? The winners fight advance into the next pay-per-view, and we do it again. And the losers fight also on the next pay-per-view. In terms of forming brackets. So this way you keep the top guys continuously fighting each other, almost in a seasonal thing. And I would do these kind of pay-per-views in each weight class. I don't know how it would be timing-wise, because you need to do pay-per-view after pay-per-view after pay-per-view. I don't know if people would how you get people to buy them. But what I'm saying is, if we got unlimited money, this is hypothetical.
Well, you do a season pass.
I would,
you
buy do a season pass. Yeah, and you would this way you would actually clean out every single weight class, top to bottom, as far as getting your bona fide number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
Sean, you see how this guy's cheating, though? You see how he's cheating? He's doing multiple pay-per-views, this guy?
No, but what I'm saying is, because then if you don't do multiple pay-per-views, you're going to leave boxing people hanging. All the winners are going to fight each other, and then the boxing's going to do what it does. Then they don't fight each other.
You know how I know Paulie wasn't good in school? He didn't read the questions. He just answered
I always went in my own entrepreneurial way. I wanted to, kind of deviate from the plan. And I like that idea. I mean, that's the only way. Look at, for example, college football with the BCS. They used to not have a playoff system, and they invented a playoff system kind of to get your bona fide number 1. You kind of need that in boxing because you got weight classes where guys just kind of go on parallel lines for years and they don't fight each other. And sometimes they never fight each other, or sometimes they fight each other when they've just milked it, and the fight's not even a good fight by the time they fight. So personally, I would do that kind of pay-per-view where it would be by weight class, and it would force the top guys.
And the wild thing is that's actually possible at this point in history because of Turki Alalshikh. He doesn't have a horse in the race. He's a fight fan, a legitimate fight fan. He wants to make the fights, and he cares about competitiveness. So he'll set these up because he doesn't care who wins, really. He just wants to see the best fights. That's what I love about what he's doing.
So Chris, I get teacher's pet vibes from you, that you were just the dork staying after school. So
I was very good at school.
Since you read the question, what is your 4 or 5 card?
I was sticking up for my guy Sean because Paulie was trying to kick his picks.
As Paulie knocks the books out of your hands in the hallway.
I was trying to say Sean's card, really, I find that to be a lot of mismatches, but it's like a sucker's pay-per-view, Sean, because you're using all the big names to sucker people into buy. Oh, man, I want to see all these big names fight each other. Okay. But they're not even good fights. They're not good fights.
Sean's making money. Chris, who are you putting out there?
All right, at the top, I'm going Tyson Fury, Anthony Joshua. I think that I still want to see that fight. We've talked about it for so long. And I think it's actually competitive again because Anthony Joshua has been looking so damn good. And his pairing with Ben Davidson, I think, has really elevated his game. And not so much elevated, but it's brought him back to what he was. And Tyson, who's looked vulnerable lately, it makes the fight that much closer and more competitive. So I like that as my top of the fight. Sean, I'm going to agree with you. I really like the Tank Davis Shakur Stevenson fight. I would love to see Jaron Ennis and Vergil Ortiz, even though I know Vergil's now at 54. But I love that fight. And if I can't make that fight, then I'll take Terrence and Ennis. I think that it's that classic changing of the potential changing of the guard, or it's either the grizzled vet gets that one last win against the young buck coming up, and then Jaron can be his guy, or Jaron overtakes the old the veteran champion, the old lion, and becomes the new star of the sport.
You don't get that anymore in boxing.
No, I know that used to be a mainstay in the sport. That was how it always
had
went.
to pass the torch.
Always passing the torch.
Marciano Lewis type of vibe.
Yeah, exactly. De La Hoya Chavez. We don't see that anymore. And how many more do I got? There was some other ones I had there too. I just drew a blank. But
hey, how about Inoue and Tank?
Oh, dude, they're too far apart in weight. I know it's a really cool concept. Actually, you know what fight I really like? Inoue and Brandon Figueroa. I like that. I like that fight a lot. I think it's a fight we're actually going to see. And then I was going to go one step lower weight classes, and we're actually getting the fight is Bam and Estrada.
Turkey, intent.
If you need some matchmakers, by the way, we have them here. Look, one fighter, there's a little raising of the eyebrows when he was on this card, when it was announced August 3rd. It was Vergil Ortiz. Why? He has a fight coming up. We'll discuss that when we come back. Welcome back. Vergil Ortiz versus Tszyu, August 3rd. Big card in Los Angeles. The only problem, Vergil Ortiz has a fight against Thomas Dulorme this Saturday, folks. Slap in the face to Thomas Dulorme to announce this fight already. I know we're not saying he's going to lose the fight on Saturday, but are you giving Dulorme a little extra motivation?
I mean, it should be motivation for Thomas Dulorme. I don't know what he's got left, though. Before we came back on air, the champ Chris made a good point. Dulorme fought Crawford at 140 pounds. So he's been around a while. He's a bit shop-worn. Was never the top of the heap type of good. I don't think he's ever won a world championship, right? So I think no. So I think he's been a solid contender at times, but yeah, this is sort of a re-entry fight for Vergil in a way. Maybe to see how good he looks to go into the Tszyu fight, which is a test in and of itself, I think, for both guys.
But Chris, with everything that go wrong, you could get cut, you could have an injury, so many problems before a big fight, big major money. Is this the right move?
I'm going to preface this with I'm very high on Vergil Ortiz. I've been hearing about him from my friend Robert Garcia for a number of years, and a lot of guys from the gym have given me reports about how much this kid's a beast, how big he is, how strong he is, how much of a workhorse he is. And to your point about Dulorme, once fighting at 140, Vergil's huge. So and Dulorme's knock is really his chin. So now you got a guy whose chin isn't the best, isn't really world class, and he's on his third weight class, and he's fighting a guy who's much bigger. They're fighting at 54. This is really a litmus test for Vergil Ortiz to see what he can do with Thomas Dulorme, because Jaron Ennis knocked him out in 1. So they're looking at this like, all right, because listen, there's a lot of talk under the wraps of Vergil Ortiz and Jaron Ennis. The fight makes a lot of sense. We were thinking it was going to happen a little while ago, but now it's a good litmus test because Jaron is the goods. If Vergil can dispatch Dulorme in a similar fashion,
Tszyu and Vergil's crazy.
That's a crazy
fight. I mean, that's a good fight, man. I really can't pick who's going to win that fight.
No.
Sean, quick question. Does it change the strategy if you're Vergil Ortiz? Get out of there early, don't get hurt, don't get cut. Is he more aggressive this Saturday because he has another fight coming?
He's already aggressive as a fighter, and he's already looking for the knockout. When you take a look at who this kid is, again, coming up from 140, your best days were at 140. Looking at what Jaron did to him in his last fight, I can bet and imagine that they are making this match just to get another fight under his belt at 154, get him back in the ring, get him hot again, and things of that nature before he gets in the ring with Tszyu. I love the fact that this fight's already announced. This August 3rd date is already announced for all of these fighters. I mean, this is something that every other sport has that boxing doesn't have. We don't know what's coming next. So we got a great schedule. And on top of that, we know we're going to get Vergil Ortiz twice. I love it.
Well, it gives us a lot to talk about in the upcoming weeks. Not just a main event that has everyone talking, but a card stacked from top to bottom. Big question, will that be the new normal in big pay-per-view boxing? We wonder about the effects of Saudi money. Well, it looks like it brings us better cards, better fights, and that's what we're all about here at ProBox TV. Thanks for joining us on Deep Waters. We'll see you next time.